Thank you for spending this half hour with us on Chapter and Verse from the Ocean State. Welcome again, Part 2. Tina Christy, Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights.
You got it. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you with us. You're a fine guest.
Thank you.
During the break between the recording of the programs, I had a question which I asked Tina if she could respond to it. It had to do with a case involving a former PBS employee by the name of Tavis Smiley. There were a number of witnesses who came forward in the harassment case involving Tavis Smiley. Now, PBS has decided to protect the anonymity of the witnesses because they say that they fear retaliation. Now, Tavis Smiley is no longer working there, so I don't know how much influence he has to retaliate, but he may have some influence left. The question that he asked is kind of an American question. Here's a guy who doesn't know who his accusers are. They won't tell him what the accusers said, because I guess in that way he could determine who it was who said it. So in an attempt to protect the witnesses, Tavis Smiley says that he's completely in the dark. He doesn't know who's saying things about him. He doesn't know what's been said. And now he's without a job. I have a friend who worked in the Department of Administration in the state of Rhode Island. And I asked my friend about this. I said, what would you do in a case like this? And he said, well, we had a case like that. And he said, in all candor, I don't know what we should do in a case like that. I mean, the accused has to have some rights, and the witnesses, we don't want them retaliated against. So we want to do two things at the same time. We want to protect the witnesses, and we want to give a man the ability to, or give a man or a woman the ability to contest the accusations made against him. Do you have any thoughts about that, Tina?
Okay, well, I'm thinking that if there is an internal investigation done by a company and they believe that a person who is accused of sexual harassment is guilty of sexual harassment, then they have the right to terminate him. Harassers under anti-discrimination law, accused harassers, don't have protections. So if someone is terminated because there was an allegation of sexual harassment made against them, they can be terminated. As we had discussed in Rhode Island, in the state of Rhode Island, you're an at-will employee, and you can be terminated for any reason unless it's a discriminatory reason.
A protected class.
Right.
Yeah.
Protected classes such as race, color, sex, religion, age, ancestral origin, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression. And sex discrimination includes sexual harassment and pregnancy.
And pregnancy?
Yes.
Interesting.
I was looking at Ray, your interesting computer notes, and I liked this. In a study after study, we're saying that power makes you more impulsive. It makes you less worried about social conventions and less concerned about the effect of your actions on others, said Dr. Keltner, psychology professor at the University of California at Berkeley. One of Keltner's experiments, for example, found that people who see themselves as wealthier were more likely to cut pedestrians off on a sidewalk. Others found that those who felt powerful were even more likely to take candy from children.
Yes.
Other experiments
Other
experiments have shown that powerful people became more focused on themselves, more likely to objectify others, and more likely to overestimate how much others like them. We discussed that in the last program on it, the power.
Yes, the power. That's a very
See what
interesting
it does?
statement. Yes.
to some people.
Now, this Me Too movement, this also, which has morphed into the Time's Up movement, has had a great cultural impact. Has it affected your position and the position of your witnesses on the ground level, so to speak, yet?
Well, where we're really seeing a big, change is sexual harassment training. We have a lot of inquiries about sexual harassment training and sexual harassment training scheduled that the commission does. It's about a two-hour training, and it includes information about the commission, how to file a charge, what sexual harassment is, and it's an interactive process. So everybody's learning during the training. So we're getting a lot of requests for training, and it's free as well.
I have a case. I don't think there's anything wrong about this case. It involved me. There was someone coming to a door. I was at a door. Someone was coming to the door, a female. I held the door open for her. I think she objected to that, so she went to another door and opened it and walked through. I was closing the door, and somebody rushed up, another female rushed up to me and said to me, "Will you hold the door for me?" And I said, "Yes." So she walked in pleased that someone was holding the door for her.
Where was this, Ray?
It was a few years ago, actually.
A few years ago?
Yeah.
In the workplace?
No, it was. It wasn't in the workplace, but
Where was this, Ray?
it was in front of Au Bon Pain, a restaurant in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And but say it was in the workplace. Did anything bad happen there?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. No. When we do investigations, we use what we call a reasonable person standard, and I think it's reasonable to assume that a reasonable person wouldn't find that offensive. If you open the door for somebody and they choose not to walk through it, that's their prerogative. But I don't see that you did anything wrong there.
Sometimes waitresses will say, I find this endearing. Waitresses will come up to me and say, "Would you like anything else, honey?" And I think that's sweet. I never objected to that.
They've called me honey.
Yeah.
Sometimes they call the female honey.
Yeah, isn't that great? Isn't that nice?
In the workplace,
Yeah.
those terms, may not be appropriate.
Oh, no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, in the workplace.
If someone objects to it, how going back to what we discussed earlier about sexual harassment being unwanted and unwelcome. Now, someone being called honey or sweetheart,
Sweetie. That's what they're called. Sweetie.
is not,
to
in
females.
itself sexual harassment.
No.
But some people may be offended by it. So
Yeah.
it might be a word
some
that we would
people.
want to stay away from in the workplace. When we do investigations, we look at the totality of the circumstances. We look at frequency and severity. So a one-time occurrence where someone's call someone honey or baby or sweetie wouldn't constitute sexual harassment. But if that person is asked to stop doing it and the behavior continues, then depending on the frequency and severity, if there are other things that are going on in the workplace besides being called honey or sweetie, we look at the totality of the circumstances and the frequency and severity to determine whether or not that could be a hostile work environment.
I would think it would be beneficial to a tip.
You
in the case of a
you mean in the
waitress,
restaurant? Yes.
In that case.
Yeah, it's beneficial, because we want to have good relations with the people whom we serve. If I'm a waiter, I would like people to think of me as being a good waiter, and hopefully they'll remunerate me at the end of my service to them. What sort of questions come up that you find interesting about the workplace? What do people ask you about?
I think that some people find it interesting to discuss the interactions between, two people or even a supervisor and subordinate or coworkers about having discussions that are based on sex or telling jokes of a sexual nature in the workplace. When we do sexual harassment trainings, I feel like some people at first might think to themselves, well, what can we do in the workplace now? But if we focus on the fact that sexual harassment is something that's unwanted, unwelcome, and something else that I like to say to people, treat your coworkers or your employees, if you have employees, like you would want to see, if it's a woman, your mother or your daughter or your wife to be treated. And the same goes for how you would want to see your husband or son or father be treated. Would you tell jokes of a sexual nature in front of your parent or your child? Probably not.
Probably not. No.
Is it okay to give somebody a hug without,
That's a question.
without them feel so? Yeah, I mean, we have these discussions like, about touching people in the workplace, which could be inappropriate. And the point that I really try to drive home in the trainings is perception. What is the other person's perception of you and the relationship that you have? Now, if you've worked with somebody for 20 years and they've been out of work and you haven't seen them and then they come back, the first thing that you might think of is that you want to give them a hug, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people do and feel that way. And my advice is that you want to really know the relationship that you have with that person and what their perception is. Is it okay to give somebody a hug in the workplace? Sure. Is it something that you want to think about before you do it? Yes, you do. Because not everybody wants to be hugged and not everybody wants to be touched. So pinching, patting, poking, blocking of free movement, rubbing somebody's shoulders, those are things that could be considered inappropriate for the workplace.
What are some of the other concerns that people have, innocent concerns, that they would ask you to clarify for them?
So when people contact the commission and feel that they've been sexually harassed, their concern, I guess, is, getting, well, I guess to your point, is that they want the behavior to stop.
Yeah.
I think that's most important.
Yeah.
And, they want to know that they have, that they have a place where they can go and, and file a charge and know that it will be investigated.
So there still is a lot of freedom in the workplace. It's just that we want to be sensitive to some particular areas of sexual harassment. I think that there are a lot of people who are on it. I was talking with a guy the other day, and I said to him, I said, sexual harassment is when somebody does something which is unwanted. And he said to me, but if I were Paul Newman, it wouldn't have been unwanted. He wasn't saying that he was doing it himself. He was just saying that sometimes the behavior seems to be focused on not just the behavior, but the other circumstances.
So you have two employees, and one may be able to get away with saying, hey, you look great today.
Yeah.
And then when the other person says, hey, you look great today, it doesn't make you feel comfortable.
Right.
And that's okay. That's okay. Then the person that you don't want to, for them to say that you look great today, they shouldn't make the comment.
Yeah.
If they're told that, I want you to stop giving me compliments, then that person should stop the behavior, even if somebody else is saying you look great today and it's acceptable by that person. Now, that in itself does not constitute sexual harassment.
Interesting. Are there any other innocent concerns that people ask you about in terms of behavior in the workplace?
Let's see. I think that at the end of the day, everybody wants to be sensitive to other people's feelings in the workplace, and they don't want to cross the line and negatively affect a person's work environment, because in the state of Rhode Island, we're all entitled to work in a hostile-free work environment based on sexual harassment or any other type of discrimination. So I think that the concern is that they don't want to do something that's going to offend another person. And sometimes people don't realize that they're offending somebody else. But in the law, it does state that if you have the purpose or effect. So if you have the effect of sexual harassment, even though you weren't purposefully sexually harassing someone, then that is sexual harassment. So that means that if you're telling jokes of a sexual nature, if you have something in your office that's, it's either some reading material or a poster that's of a sexual nature, that's inappropriate for the workplace.
I would think that in recent years, there has been an increase in this problem coming to your commission.
Is that right?
Well, I believe that more people are learning that they don't have to tolerate sexual harassment, and that's why we're having charges of sexual harassment. So I think increased awareness about not having to tolerate sexual harassment in the workplace, because it is illegal.
Is it okay to send somebody a birthday card in the workplace?
Oh, absolutely.
How about in schools, colleges,
So
junior high schools?
are we talking in the aspect of employer-employee, or
Students.
You're talking about students. So the commission does not have jurisdiction over
This is what I'm wondering.
anything that happens in schools, unless it's an employer-employee relationship or an employee relationship where there's some discrimination happening. If there is someone reports discrimination in the schools, then I direct them to the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. There is a small area where the commission does have jurisdiction over education, and I believe it's pre-K, and then it's college, and it's only in the area of disability, I believe.
What's the difference between, there's a Washington Post had a newspaper article called, "What's the difference between sexual assault and harassment?" What's the difference between sexual assault and harassment?
Well, that's a great question. So we can have a person file a charge of sexual harassment in the workplace, but they've also been physically assaulted. So not only is there civil laws protecting that person, but there's also criminal laws that protect that person.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes. So myself, I've had cases where they are filing a charge of sexual harassment, and there are also criminal charges filed with the same circumstances.
Well, yes. Some of the categories in this article from the Washington Post talk about sexual assault, rape, groping, hostile work environment, quid pro quo, harassment. It's easy for me to see that rape would be, a criminal matter.
I have a case right now where there's an allegation of rape in the workplace.
Yes.
So we talk about hugging and touching, but really sexual harassment is very serious. And unfortunately, we have these allegations that we investigate that are egregious and serious.
The Washington Post also has another category, which they think is somewhat interesting these days, the category of sex addiction. Does that come up at all?
That's interesting. Sex addiction in sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Someone has said that that's their excuse for sexually harassing
exactly.
someone.
Yes.
It's because they have a sex addiction.
Yeah.
No, I have not heard that as a reason for sexual harassment. I haven't seen a response saying that the reason why I behaved in this manner towards this person is because I have a sex addiction.
If somebody made the claim that they were not in complete control of their behavior because of sex addiction, does that figure in at all?
I don't believe so, because although a person may have maybe that's a mental disability, which is causing them to behave in this manner, the standard is that you have a legitimate reason to judge that everyone behaves in an appropriate manner in the workplace, regardless of whether or not they have some sort of disability, that wouldn't preclude them from appropriate workplace behavior.
Yeah. The Washington Post is
that was a toughie.
Going out on a limb there, because sexual addiction is a very controversial topic among the therapists. Some of the therapists will say that it really doesn't exist, that there's no such a thing as sexual addiction. And other therapists actually treat sexual addiction, and they claim that there is such a thing as sexual addiction, and that people can be treated for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't believe that it would excuse inappropriate workplace behavior in sexual harassment or any other type of, disruptive behavior in the workplace.
Tina, what was your major at URI for you to be sent to such a wonderful commission for your internship?
I was a political science major.
Political science.
Interesting. The Associated Press did a story called "In Sexual Assault Laws, Definition of Consent Varies Widely." Does that ever come up in...
Mr. Weinberg?
This is Weinstein
Look
there.
familiar there.
Yeah, that's Weinstein there.
Is that how you pronounce his name, Weinberg?
Yeah. I don't know if you can see this. And the camera can see this.
No, they'd have to have it zoom in.
Yeah.
The camera zoom in. You can't see that, but I've seen it on TV.
The Associated Press thinks that in different states, does that come up at all? Consent?
I haven't seen it. I mean, the cases that I investigate, the person who is filing the charge, the complainant is looking for the behavior to stop, or if there was some sort of terms and conditions of employment, negative terms and conditions of employment that they were subjected to because they, rejected the advances or filed the charge. They've already made it quite clear that they're looking for the behavior to stop, or that they complained, and that they complained about the behavior and it didn't stop.
So it doesn't really go to the almost metaphysical aspect of consent. It's behavioral based in terms of the treatment of sexual harassment.
Well, we like for people to be able to say, no, we want this behavior to stop, but looking into, what you're saying about consent, is it because somebody's not giving a hard no? Is that what you're talking about? Like where someone's saying, just sort of being passive and maybe hoping that the behavior will go away, and that someone is misinterpreting that as consent?
Yeah. There was really an interesting program. I'm not sure, I'm a little older than a lot of other people. So when I mention a name, some it'll ring true with some people, but with other people it may not ring as true. I'm thinking of a guy by the name of Phil Donahue, who used to be the household name in talk shows, television talk shows, before Oprah arrived. He was also from Chicago. Oprah was from Chicago as well.
My cousins in Westport, when they had a limousine company years and years ago,
Yes.
my cousin Dolores Aruda and, gosh, her mother Bertha Aruda, they gave transportation to Phil Donahue
Wow.
when he was down in this area. And this is years back. He gave them a $50 tip. Now, that's good now. This is years ago, so that's worth a lot more money.
Yes.
He was very generous.
That's a good tip.
He had a program which was Rhode Island-based from Brown University. It was written about in the papers. His producers got a hold of the paper, and they said, let's run with this. So there were a bunch of students, co-eds, at Brown University, and they were going into the women's rooms, and with their lipstick, they were writing the names of people they said had raped them. And I guess they weren't getting any response from the police, at least that's what the thought in the Donahue show was at first. But then Donahue began to probe them, and he said, tell us about the situation. And what happened was the girls were, the co-eds at Brown University, had consensual sexual relations with college guys in the past. When they look back on that consensual relationship, they have regrets that they ever got involved with that individual. And they said that was an unwanted, in retrospect, an unwanted sexual occurrence. And they said, because it's unwanted, it's a rape. And Donahue he didn't know where to go with it. He basically said, this is not what we thought of when we considered the subject of rape.
So in relating that to sexual harassment is only sexual harassment once the person says that they want the behavior to stop. Mm-hmm. So you can't go back to consensual behavior from the past and say, I regret that happened. So the sexual harassment only occurs once you ask for the behavior to stop,
yes.
And then it continues.
It's in the present, not so much looking back over the past. It's in the present.
Well, when I'm doing investigations of sexual harassment, sometimes sexual harassment will have gone on for some time because it can be an uncomfortable situation for people to want to report. So they think that maybe if they brush it off, it will go away.
Yeah.
Or that if they don't, provoke the person, that they'll stop the behavior. Or if they don't, if they don't go along with the person, or maybe just ignore the person, that the behavior will stop. So, people don't want to come forward right away to report sexual harassment. The commission suggests that if there is some sexual harassment or other type of discrimination, that if it's possible, a person complain in the workplace first. So companies of 50 or more should have a policy should have a sexual harassment policy. All companies should have a sexual harassment policy, but I believe the law says 50 or more if you have 50 or more employees, you have to have a sexual harassment policy. But all companies should have sexual harassment policies.
That's a good point to end with.
Showing
running short on time, but that's a good point.
Okay.
All companies
quick question.
should have that sexual harassment policy, Tina.
And letting their employees know where they can complain if they feel like they're being sexually harassed or discriminated against in employment. So whether it be a supervisor, human resources officer, or the president of the company, somewhere that a person can go and complain in-house within the company.
Do you give classes?
Yes, we do.
So that if a company of 50 or more wants to get in touch with you, you can help them understand.
Any company can request sexual harassment training from the commission or anti-discrimination training, and the commission will come out and do the training for free.
The number one more time, Tina.
222-2661.
God loves you, and so do we.